to the Founders Roundtable. This is the first episode in a series of conversations with founders, investors, and innovators about impact, conscious innovation, and more. We're so thrilled to be starting this discussion today. I'm Dominique Golden, the founder of Collective Impact, a social enterprise that educates corporate employees on the plight of social issues. And through our nonprofit arm, we curate events that allow them to impact the communities who need it most.
And I'm Isha. I'm the founder of Trio, and we are a digital health company building a future with zero Band-Aid health solutions for chronic conditions. And our tech-backed approach and platform are really focused on root cause medicine to be every patient's partner in healing. So that's what we're doing at Trio. And I am super excited to introduce you all to Monica Wheat, who is joining us today. She is an exceptional leader and innovator whose experience includes founding multiple programs that support aspiring innovators everywhere via Digerati Girls, Parallel Ventures, Founders Boost Detroit, Venture Catalyst, so much. And as an advisor at Grand Circus, a consultant with several Fortune 10 corporations, partner at Backstage Capital, and now managing director of Techstars Equitech. She's truly empowering founders to make waves across industries. And because of this, her work has been featured everywhere: Cranes, the Huffington Post, Black Enterprise, and Forbes. So this intro doesn't do her work justice. And the real question is, what doesn't she do? So I will hand it over to her. And so, Monica, we'd love to hear your quick elevator pitch. Who is Monica and what is she passionate about?
That's a good question. Passionate. The question, what don't I do? I don't sleep that much. I have a lot of fun doing things similar to what Dominique mentioned that have impact. For me, it's usually impact to the ecosystem, and that's cities, especially emerging cities and emerging markets. To me, I think that's the easiest way to change people's lives. And I happen to have a skill in doing it. And I literally don't sleep that much. And so with that time, I spend a lot of time coming up with new business ideas, new collaboration ideas pretty much every week. And I'm always putting something out there, but I love it. I love the work. And as we mentioned in a prior conversation, the work that I do helps me sleep really well at night. And so I go to bed that way and I wake up that way. And it's just been a really good part of my life to, have these experiences.
I love that. And really being able to sleep good at night, I think is seeking peace, I think is huge, whatever you do. So I love that you spoke on that. And we're also curious about, your story. And many times, who we become as adults, we have glimpses of that. Yeah, okay. So you see where I'm going with this. So we are curious about how did you get in this space of impacting? And clearly you're different as a child. So we're just curious, yeah. What did that look like?
I'm an intelligent person. And as an intelligent person, they always put me in different classes and different spaces. And I've always loved that. But with that, they said, you're smart, you do math and science, you're going to be an engineer, you're going to be a doctor. And that's what I thought I was going to do. I was going to be an engineer, I was going to be a doctor. And I would go to all these programs in college and middle school, high school, college that were, for students who were on one of those two paths. And that's what I thought I would be doing for my foreseeable life. That's what I actually started out doing. I attended the University of Michigan in the College of Engineering. I had the pleasure, now it's the pleasure, at the time it wasn't, I had the pleasure of working my way through school full time. And that just gave me a different perspective than other students that I was going to school with. My thoughts on what it took to make it, and my thoughts on, what I got to see of the working world at a very early age shaped a lot of just my path, because I was like, okay, I don't want to do this. I also was very fortunate, through all my work experiences, really early on, I got an opportunity to work overseas with General Motors at Shanghai GM and their intern co-op program, and was going to go into a more permanent role there. And at the time, I loved the work there. I loved the people there. I loved the innovation. I loved that I was a part of that mix. And I loved, working for a company as big as GM and, getting a chance to be exposed to what they were doing in global markets. But I also knew that most people work their whole lives to get a chance to have an overseas position. And here I was having this position very early on. And I was like, okay, there's got to be something, there's got to be something a little bit different than, to be something a little bit different than this, and I didn't want to, I knew at that time too, that I didn't want to be in a cubicle. Because that's what engineering is. A lot of it's at the time, industrial operations, electrical, all those spaces and places, those roles were in traditional corporate cubicles, and I hated it. And I just knew that I was like, I was like, I cannot start here and then do this for the next 20 years. And so I think for me, it was that. And then the second part was I like to talk. And my bosses and my old colleagues would always tell me that in the engineering space, that was a rarity. And so more often than not, even as a young person, they would put me in charge of, presentations and, bigger meetings and things like that, because I liked to talk. Well, I like that part more than I like the other side. And so when those opportunities came up, they would constantly have me at the forefront. And that just kind of shaped me understanding what made me tick and what made me, I like the big picture. I like the vision. I like the strategy aspect of it more so than I liked the mechanics and the electrical codes and things like that. And so I kept getting more and more projects in that space. And then eventually, one of my projects had left, by that time I was in a whole different company, but one of my projects was in corporate engineering. And I was tasked with looking at companies who wanted to partner with the big three. They wanted to partner with GM, Ford, and Chrysler, and they're startups. And so here I am in my suit, and, with all this corporate cubicles, and they're coming in here, they were in jeans, their eyes were alive. They were passionate about what they were trying to sell. They were in the midst of this, and this was their opportunity. I was their opportunity to get this big, deal or contract with, one of these bigger Fortune 10 companies. And to me, I just was looking across the table at them like, they look like they're having fun, like they look like this is their moment. And I was like, I want that. And at one of those, as is normal with most people who are in the corporate world, we had many ups and downs, layoffs, shifts, departments, all that kind of stuff. And in one of those downs, I was like, well, why don't I just try this thing that I saw them doing? And so I kind of tiptoed initially, half corporate roles, half, otherwise. But then eventually I jumped fully into like the venture space. I did not know that venture could be a career. I did not know about venture capital as a career, or is it a space? I learned a little bit about it in college because at that time, I'm going to date myself, Facebook was coming out. They were recruiting in campus. They were like less than 100 employees, and they were like these newer entities were coming out and they were recruiting. But a lot of folks were seeing those as like high risk. Why would you do that? You need a job at GM. Like why would you take this risk with this small little company that no one's ever heard of? Now everyone's heard of it and everyone has wanted to work there. But I remember when they were recruiting on campus for those first initial roles. But that process was definitely not what I planned. To your original question, I definitely thought I'd be designing cars or designing, plants or, supply chain strategy or something like that. I thought that was going to be my path, but I meandered in the middle and I've loved being on this side. I've been in this space about 10, 15 years. It overlapped in the middle with some of my corporate work, but I love what I do.
Wow. Oh.
Any professional experience that you had throughout college and after college before you transitioned into sort of the venture space and also becoming a founder and director at Digerati, how do you think that professional experience, despite not being very fun, you couldn't sleep very well at night compared to right now, how do you think it shaped your abilities to really become a founder and a better director?
It shaped everything. And I honestly, I think there's pluses and minuses on those who go straight into the startup world and never have had corporate experience, because from the very beginning, like I was on an executive level track. And I was a global lead and things like that at different roles and at different times. But I was on an executive level track and I learned how to work. I learned how to execute. I learned how to be accountable. I learned, all of those experiences prepared me. Now it's different to walk around with the budget of a big multinational than walking around with the startup budget, because your pressures are different. Because there's a lot of pressure and political pressure on making that money win. It was always about my ROI and how much money did I save? And, this contract, I saved X million here and X million there. Those were the metrics before. On the startup side, similar pressures, because it's all live or die. Because, you got to have enough, have to have enough revenue to keep keep a company going, to keep your employees employed, and be able to still grow. That's a part of the process, but it's the same path on the corporate side. It's just different. It's just different factors or different variables. So I always say when I talk about it, is that my corporate experience, especially at the levels that I was operating, directly prepared me to run my own companies and do the things that I'm doing. Also, quiet as it's kept, and it's not really quiet because most people do it. It was most of my connections. It was the fact that, from a very early stage, I was working with Google and I was working with Microsoft and I was working with all of these folks. And I had a really vast network from working with these companies and being partnered with them that helped me launch a lot of things that I launched. Because the first things that I launched were social initiatives, mostly focused at young girls and women and getting them into tech. And so I knew who to call. I knew I could, Google was my very first sponsor and backer of the programs that we were running. They gave us their offices, they, sponsored us, they were, all that kind of stuff out the gate. And that was based on relationships that I had built during corporate. And I don't think I would have got a leg up that high, had I not, spent all the years that I spent in corporate working, and they knew how I worked. They knew my reputation, all those kind of things. Those things aided in me, doors opening for me on the startup side. And initially when we first went to start developing ecosystems, and I, figured out that this world of venture capital existed, and we did some of those early angel investments and some of those early spaces and places where we're trying to build this stuff. Out the gate, again, people were still like, why would you risk, why would you spend all your money with all your time with all these broke kids when you could be, on this side? And it was a struggle. It was a struggle to convince folks, and they were, really just kind of really curious and frowning, when I would tell them what I was doing. But about the time when the bankruptcies happened, when GM and Chrysler went into bankruptcy and Ford, didn't go into bankruptcy, but also, was having some transitional times, that's when the doors opened up as well, because all those folks that I had worked with, before it was like, hey, especially in the Detroit area, it was, that you can graduate from high school, get a job at a plant, making 60, 70K a year, overtime, retire, get a pension at 40, 45, and then start a whole new career. And a lot of people, many multi-generations had done that here in this area. So it's very difficult to tell a culture that's built off of that level of success and access to come take a risk and possibly go broke and possibly, do all these things in the midst of that kind of ecosystem. But when 2008 hit, and the bankruptcies happened, I think that shook the foundation of what people thought was unshakable, what they thought was too big to fail, which ultimately it was. They saved the companies. The companies came out stronger than ever. Their innovation teams are what I work with now. I work with their innovation and their venture teams now, whereas before I was working more on their corporate kind of development product side. But that 2008 kind of was the switch where it did change the game, because now people were like, well, maybe it's not so crazy that, we look at some of these other options, or maybe, okay, we'll give you some more, we'll sponsor this. We'll give you some space. We'll do that. All of that happened that kind of, they ramped up after about 2008. So it's been a fun path though, for sure.
Nice. Wow. Yeah. I remember, I'm happy you touched on Google, because I remember, I believe it was my first demo day when I came back to Detroit. I believe could have been around 2018 or so. And I remember going into the Google headquarters. We actually had chicken shawarmas. It could have been maybe 2019, right? The dates are all fuzzy. But I remember seeing you speak, and I was like, who's this woman? She's so powerful. She's speaking. I was blown away. And I know you speak to a gazillion people. So I remember I was going up and I was chatting with you for a bit, and you were so kind and welcoming. And I feel like that's such a rarity. But I'm happy you talked about being a huge connector, because I wanted to know, when you were building within this Detroit ecosystem, what did it look like? What was missing? And can you talk more about how you were actually filling those gaps, to then look now and being a part of the Detroit demo days, right? Going from I can't see any of this here within our ecosystem to now playing an integral part in one of our largest things here in the city.
So yeah, I would say it's a stark difference between Detroit back in those early days in Detroit now. Detroit was the first city that I did any ecosystem building work in. And so I've gone on since into what we call Third Coast. Third Coast is Michigan to Miami, emerging markets where I've seen similar levels, if you will, and levers also actually too. But I think the key was in those early days, I tried to cut and paste what I saw in Silicon Valley into Detroit. And it didn't work. And a lot of that was because we didn't, although we had tech talent, we had the youth and the energy, and we had tons of innovation, and we had the, people who would be kind of receptive to entrepreneurship. We did not have funding, and we didn't have the culture. We didn't have the culture of like risk that goes along with this type of innovations. Our culture was, 40, 100-year-old companies, 20-year careers, tried and true metrics, people who were starting businesses were mostly starting businesses to be suppliers and partners to the big three. That was the bread. That was the thought. If anyone was entrepreneurial, it was in that space. And so I think those two things were missing. And so we had to kind of figure out how to include those things. We're going to have a pitch competition. And there, literally the question was why? This is in the early days. Literally the question was like, okay, but what does that do? Like, and so it was a lot of convincing, a lot of massaging to try to understand, like, how do we best nurture entrepreneurial talent in this region? And I think we've always, we were the first place where the U.S. Patent Office, set up a satellite office because that many patents were being filed in this area. And I tell people all the time, like in the earliest days, I was still working at GM in the Renson. Woodward was empty. It was completely empty. It was no one was there during the day. I remember like at certain points I had security would escort me to my car each night. And we had like one or two restaurants on Woodward that, that weren't in the Renson. The Renson had its own food court and there were some nicer ones at the top. But for the most part, if you left the building, there was like a Coney Island and a Chinese food place. And that was it. But to see it now, a lot of those buildings launching and a lot of those initiatives that brought businesses and small businesses and bigger brands back to the city, a lot of that was a lot of trial and error and a lot of people who were risk tolerant, who said, okay, Dan Gilbert obviously was a big one, took a bet, start bringing some of those initial monies and movement and volume down there, but as well as, security and, those kind of things. But I always tell people very, very clearly that I am standing on the work of giants who have been in the Detroit area and done this work for decades. And so they've been small business owners in various places. And for me, it was just amplifying a lot of work that they had already done, but then also trying my best to introduce what tech and innovation aspect to it, or reintroduce, because, we were some of the original home of innovation, and always have been. And just Detroit had a period where it had died down. But those folks were the folks who were, long-term been the spirit of like entrepreneurship in the city. It was just harnessing it in a different way. And for us, it was like adding the culture of risk. So we started with things like, weekend-long hackathons and, competitions and things like that. So they're kind of getting excited. They're understanding where it's going to go, but then also really doubling down on doing things to make our founders attractive so that outside capital would come in and inside capital that was here in Michigan, but investing in other places would invest in startups and entrepreneurship.
Now, since we're in the timeline of, Detroit's evolution and we're moving towards talking about the present, I'll sort of go into talking about, present funding resources. And I really want to, I guess I'll talk about my own story. I mean, I started this right out of undergrad. And so, for me, I had a little bit of a network I'd built up for myself just through running a social impact incubator in undergrad and things like that. But it's really difficult to start off in the space. Like you were talking about, connections are everything. And for you, your corporate career was very useful in helping you do that. But yes. I'm wondering, if you don't have any of that, if you don't have connections from school or from work or, anywhere else, what can, especially women of color founders who are vastly underfunded, what can those founders in specific do to best prepare for their first round and set themselves up for success, just in general?
Networking and putting yourself out there, even if you don't feel that you're perfect, even though 9 times out of 10, they have more traction than most people in the room, because that's how most of the female founders are. They just go for it. It's that jump that they don't do. They're still waiting to be perfect before they present. They're waiting to be perfect before they come to the hackathon. They're waiting. And I just wish that more of them would jump. And so that's the thing I try really hard, is to try to like open doors wherever I go, but also to try to encourage women, and especially women in tech and women in entrepreneurship and venture capital, to jump and put themselves out there, to build that network, because that's how you get it. You know, people remember that amazing woman that they met at the conference who had an idea and, you know, had battle tested it and this, that, and the other. And they remember that, and they'll talk to you 6 months down the road when you call them again. But you got to first do the intro and the connection. You know, you got to do that initial connection piece so that you'll be remembered. And I think that's the biggest piece, is that I think as women, we want everything lined up, and that's a generalization. Not all women are like that. Obviously, there's a ton of women in the venture and tech startup space, but in general, when they're starting out, that's one of the things that I see. But to build that network, that's what it is. It's really about going out to some of these spaces where people are doing hackathons, where people are doing startup weekends, or where people are doing, you know, office hours, and participating, signing up, asking some initial questions. I think that's the initial part. And what I also tell people too is that there's a language to venture. There is a language that is spoken that makes it easier to feel confident in a conversation. And you get that language from blogs and from reading books like Venture Deals, and from reading books like Arlen Hamilton's It's About Damn Time. And you get that language, and once you learn that language, you're more confident to jump into a conversation. Now you feel like you know a little bit, and like you won't be totally lost. And so if you don't feel confident enough yet to go into a space and place and just put yourself out there and your business idea out there, start with, you know, some of these blogs and some of these books and things like that make you more confident in the language of venture. And then you'll have a better experience when you're going into these live events. And that's how you get on. And that's how you start building your relationships and building yourself in the venture world.
Oh, I think that was amazing advice. I mean, since Isha and I actually started this, the Founders Roundtable, we follow people on Twitter, reading books, podcasts, and I really think that's made a huge difference in us kind of understanding the ecosystem. Just the other day, we found the startup investor tool that we didn't even know was something that existed, right? And this is because we follow somebody influential on Twitter that has really been educating us. So yeah, I guess you're just giving us more confidence that we're on the right track as far as where, you know, we need to go, because I think as an early stage founder, you think that you need $1 million right when you start to even get in the game and all these things. And it's like, no, it's really more so focusing about putting yourself out there and learning, trying it again.
and again.
Exactly. And again. And also this conversation today with you, I think proves that strategy works, because you said yes to us and gave us a chance to have some of your time. So it's like, yes, it's just confirmation that it really does work. And it gives people like us in this position even more confidence in what we can do. So
I cannot stress that enough. That's why I always tell the story of the juxtaposition of those who go out and give a napkin with like some scribbles on it, and those who wait until they're perfect. Because the napkin guys, they didn't really have much, but they went out there and now they've had a conversation with Mark Cuban, and now they've gotten some feedback from Mark Cuban. And sometimes he laughs, and sometimes it's like, come on, kid. But at least they did it, and now they know, you know?
Right. So, exactly.
Now they know.
Yeah, exactly. Now they know. So I'm happy you actually, that was something we were going to talk to you too about, just like any type of tools or resources. But I think that just gave the audience something right there, just that advice to go out there, look into the books, find influential people online, and just educate yourself. So, no, I think
I would also add really quickly, when you are going to, like, especially in a lot of the Zoom virtual world, but it also applies when you're in a live conference as well. When you know that who the speaker is going to be, spend some time researching the speakers. Don't just go and sit in the audience. Like, have a purpose that you're trying to get out of a particular session that you're going to. So if you're a tech founder and you're trying to hire a CTO, like, figure out who in this thing has either been a CTO, has a good CTO story, whatever, and ask that question to them on the panel. Like, that's your biggest issue right now. That's what you should be talking to them about, and make a connection with them. And again, it becomes 10 times more value added when you come out of the events, having researched the people going into them, and then number two, having gotten tangible advice on something specific that you are facing as a founder. And I can't, like, I do that. I always tell people I do that all the time. Like, when I'm looking for LPs, or I'm looking for, founders for a program or whatever it may be, I'm going to, okay, well, there's 400 founders in this room. I'm asking them ahead of time, is it okay if I post this about my program? Is it okay if, like, there's a point and there's an outcome. And so it's not just time spent, it's time spent with an outcome, and you're one step closer to your goal.
Okay. So say, a founder has reached out to an investor, they're ready to raise funding. And I kind of want to hop into talking about now the funder mindset. So,
Okay.
After you began to lead programs that were really supporting founders from, around the world, you've probably seen a lot of, and have gotten to observe a lot of, investor mindsets. And I think we really wanted to know how you've seen those investor mindsets changing around funding diverse founders, because obviously some investors take a conscious effort to look at their investment theses and sort of see how those need to change and what are the metrics they're really looking at, and change their mindset. And so how have you seen those change, if at all? And how can things like, setting specific metrics and things like that help with that?
I've definitely seen a shift. Another story that I tell all the time is, like, when I first wanted to do this stuff, I wanted to be a VC. And when I saw this was years ago, this is over a decade ago, I wanted to be a VC. And the first people that I asked about it, they told me I couldn't. They point blank told me that VCs don't look like me. And they were right. VCs, it's a very small community. It's a very typecast community, for lack of a better term. And they told me, out point blank, but I was like, wait a minute, I started out in commodities trading. I was a commodities trading analyst, and I was on my way to being a commodities trader. I thought that was what I was going to do for a hot second. But I'm like, so I have experience in finance. Like, what do you mean I can't do this? They're like, it's a club, and you have to, this, that, and the other are the things that they look for to be in this club. And so to say that that mindset has changed is an understatement right now, because so many folks that I know personally are now fully blooded VCs with fully blooded funds. And so many folks that I know personally are now long-term investors, but now are looking in markets outside of Silicon Valley and New York. And they're also looking at markets of founders who don't meet that typecast. Because it used to be that they were looking for the gold, the holy grail. They went to Stanford, they went to Yale, or they went to Harvard. They had a dad who was in something, and, they were all engineers, and they were going to start this company. Like, it was a typecast. They were all male, they were all young, they were all under 25, blah, 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 blah. And I think over time, that, people saw that there was a gap in what, who that was allowing to actually raise funds and capital. And they also saw that there was also a dearth in the types of ideas that were being created, because they were catering to themselves rather than to the broader market, which the broader market is, in some places like Detroit, 80% plus of a different one underrepresented minority or another. So if you have a market like that, but you're only investing in folks who don't meet that model, then you're missing out. Mm-hmm. And I think that was part of the switch that made people open up their minds on how they think about their investment theses, and more importantly, even if they have the same thesis, where they think they're going to find talent to meet that thesis. That was a big piece too, of like, it can be in Detroit, it can be in Miami, it can be in Ohio, it can be in Minnesota, and here's why. But on top of that, these founders may not look like the way that you think they're going to look. And so once you get past that shock, the sticker shock, if you will, then I think the conversation has changed the past few years, like, innumerably. And I know it's been, especially in this last year, where just people have been more thoughtful. They've been home. They're not just moving, as fast as they used to move before. People are thinking more about their business, about their goals, about what they really want out of life. And I think that's just shook a lot of things up as well. And it's been a great market for all founders right now, especially early stage, but it's especially been a good market for underrepresented founders, because they're able to get in the mix and get, be considered, whereas before they weren't even considered. And I think that's a huge part of like this current space of how people are thinking about investment and thinking about where talent is, because that's the thing. There's two sides. There's a thought of like philanthropy in business, and then there's a thought about like, actual business growth. And so somewhere, like, you want the middle ground where people are being thoughtful about the kind of companies that they build and how they build their companies, but the companies have to be successful. Right. Point blank, period. They have to be successful. You have to be able to get a return on your investment, or else it's not worth it. Else you should be in a different line of business, and you should be pure philanthropy if you're not looking for a return. And so I think I think people understanding that you can do both. You can still make money while still being conscious of who you're choosing and how you're choosing. I think that has changed the game and changed how people think about the world and how people think about venture and funding and things like that. And so it's just been an opening on both sides. And I think people are deploying capital in a lot of different ways than they never did before.
I think I can think of definitely a few funds and programs that are doing a really good job of that. But if you want to shout out any right now that have sort of led the way.
Obviously, like I spent a significant time this past few years with the Backstage Capital crew. Their whole thesis, they were one of the earlier firms, I should say, because they're a boutique level, but that really focused on underestimated founders, women, people of color, members of the LGBT community. That's Backstage Capital's thesis, is that there's talent here and find it. But I've also worked with such amazing companies like Harlem Capital, which is a similar thesis. That's okay. But there's also like she's a Backstage alum, and she just started a community fund that is focused on community focus, where community is the superpower in a business. So that's based on like exclusive communities and things like that, where you're able to build around that. But you have tons and tons of groups that are in that space that are building and thinking with a broader mindset. And you have groups like All Raise, which is focused on women in venture capital, has a ton of women and women-led venture funds. You have Pivotal. You have just all these different groups that are so focused on like changing the game on how capital is distributed. Here in Detroit, we've always had Bell. We've always had Bell Capital. We've always had some of these other groups that have always invested in women, always invested in, and had a thought towards underrepresented groups. And then you have groups where that's not their thesis, but it ends up being their intent. So like Invest Detroit and Detroit Venture Partners and things like that. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't like talk about like Techstars. Techstars, that's why I've been a partner of Techstars for over 10 years, because they've always been focused on diversity and community. And of late, they're really exciting, looking at, they've announced their big $100 million fund with JP Morgan Chase. And then obviously we're in the midst of the Equitec accelerator, which is an investment directly. One of the theses in one of the three parts of the thesis for Equitec is focused on underestimated founders. The other two are focused on founders from any background who believe that diversity is a force multiplier, and that are building businesses with diversity and equity as part of their mission, as the second part of the thesis. Or the third part of the thesis, that they're building a product where the product breaks down barriers and increases access to the broader society. And so it's a three-part way to look at equity and inclusion, but just again, the thought behind being intentional on how and where we think talent's going to be found, that talent that's going to give us a return on investment.
Right, absolutely. You're saying this is a great time and space right now for founders within the market. So I was curious to know, what do you think about with the JP Morgan Chases and the corporations now really shifting into community initiatives more than ever, and also investing in women of color? Do you think this is the shift? I know this is something we needed, but I wanted to definitely hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it's exciting for me because I think like I've been a part of dozens, if not over 100 at this point, different investment review committees for different programs where they're making decisions on who's going to get a check. And so often for not, I've seen them ask, and I've pointed it out, both in the meetings and after the meetings, just like you ask questions of the women founders that you didn't ask of the men. You ask questions of the underrepresented founders that you assumed and you didn't even, that weren't part of your setup for, the broader base. And I've seen that for years, and it's been a frustration for me. And the thing that just also real talk, the key is that most folks didn't really realize that they were doing it. I've been in so many spaces and places where, the questions for the women founders were like, are you going to have children? And, do you plan to get married? And, what's your style? What's your this, what's your that? Just trying to suss out like, things that they just assumed the men had those pieces, that they would be assertive and that their style was this and they're this, and they didn't ask them about their family plans. They didn't ask them about, those different things. But if you're using that to rank and figure out like who's going to be a good bet from an investment standpoint, those are things that we cannot do. So right now I'm beyond excited to see, not only see some of these companies who like put their money where their mouth is, like work with Microsoft and several initiatives, work with Google and countless initiatives, but also see them start to fulfill it. So not just like put it up and you'll have a PR story, but actually execute on it, like actually, fund programs and actually, have people, be certified and have people, get access to capital and get training and get mentorship and, be a part of like the Google Black Founders Fund or, like these different channel partner things. Like one of the groups that I work with a lot is the Black Channel Partner Alliance with Microsoft, which is focuses on founders who are building IT services, building businesses, and making sure that they're getting not only access, but they're being fully integrated into the ecosystem of those who become official channel partners and business partners with Microsoft. Those are huge initiatives, huge moments of growth and uptick. And a lot of those, like in that same space, like Women in Cloud, they focus on women in tech who are starting these businesses and are looking for leg up and customers and all those kind of things. And they're putting, their collective big corporate stick has, strength, and they're putting it to work. And so if I'm living in a moment that I didn't know would come when I started this journey. And so it's really, really great to see. It's really great to be in the midst of it and to be a part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's also a Fearless Fund that there's, I believe, 3 women, one from Detroit, actually starting it. It's a great initiative. Collect and Cultivate is a really great newsletter as well. And that's something that we will also do with this, with the videos and the links, is to provide the community here that we're trying to build with that type of information. So information is power. And the more folks know how to find the information and then how to find mentors to help them, that they'll be in a much better position. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I do want to go back a little bit to the founder perspective now again, and talk about building a team and really talking about and focusing in on this idea of diversity debt, because it's a huge issue with, like teams that are largely homogeneous early on, having a more difficult time than recruiting diverse founders later on. And especially like with my generation and just younger generations in general, like we are now less likely to, if we're joining a company, we want a more inclusive work environment, whether that's, for women, for minority founders, etc. And, if you want to attract top tier candidates, you really want to make sure you have that diverse team, because otherwise how are you supposed to get that top talent that, larger tech companies especially are looking for? When I'm thinking of my own situation. So how would you recommend founders when they're starting out? Sometimes it's really easy to get caught up in thinking about other things. And, there's a lot going on, especially in your first year of building something. You're not necessarily thinking about your company culture all the time, but it does start at day one, you building an inclusive company culture. So how do you sort of adopt that mindset of inclusivity and make sure that you're including it in your mission and you're including it in your sort of mindset when you're bringing people on your team? Because I see, not all founders doing that.
It's something that we talk about a lot, because if you look at, the way that Silicon Valley was built, and like the Boston, New York area, like ecosystems were built. They were built first on the venture side, and then now they're rapidly trying to kind of add a diversity lens and restructure, businesses, ecosystem funding, all that kind of stuff, because now they realize that it's become this kind of exclusive column and exclusive pillars, and that are difficult for folks to crack. And so I often tell people that the key and the easiest way to start is to, number one, be intentional. And then number two, to keep trying. That's the easiest, those are the easiest two things, to have those as the mantra, like as part of your setup. Somewhere in there, like we're not going to develop and find this perfect, perfect diversity plot that works for all the days, for all the years. But what we are going to do is we're going to commit to being eternally striving for, looking for diverse perspectives and continually improving. If you have that as part of your DNA, you'll be fine. But if you think that you're gonna put in all this effort and you're gonna come up with this one solution, and the one solution is going to then persist through time and through all the levels of your company, the founding team, the growth team, the expansion team, it's not. It really is an iterative process that changes every time new people are in the room. The other thing I always tell people is that I think an easy way to kind of focus on from a strategy perspective, sorry about that. I think the easiest way to start from a strategy perspective is to then, I think, look at who your customer target is. And so if you have a specific product for a specific type of customer, make sure that your product is reflective and your organization is reflective of the way that you're targeting. So if you're looking at the broader United States ecosystem as your ultimate target, then your team should reflect that broader ecosystem. Your product, should reflect that broader ecosystem, and be thoughtful of those price points, things like that. If you have a much smaller niche, then understand that your focus can be on the niche, but still that you're problem solving. If you problem solve for yourself by yourself, you're probably not going to solve the problem. So when you think a little bit, when you come with outside perspectives, you're probably going to get there much faster. I talk to people about that all the time, because I think it's something that people. I'll say the same thing. I say the same thing for underrepresented folks. Underrepresented folks in a circle are not going to solve problems for underrepresented folks. It has to be a diverse circle. It's just logic. Like you have to be thoughtful of like how other people perceive things. You have to be thoughtful about, what the history is. You have to be thoughtful about what the future is. And that's not going to happen in a circle if everybody looks the same as you. And that's on both sides of the fence. And so I think there is a debt there. And there's, I think that's something that like Detroit and like New Orleans and Miami and, certain parts of Texas and some of these other emerging ecosystems had as part of their DNA, because they had majority minority populations. To them, they were starting from a place of diversity and then trying to build the infrastructure on top of it. And for them, it was a little bit easier to have those things integrated in front and center. Many people are still surprised to this day when you come to Detroit and understanding like how Detroit is made up and how it works and who's going to be a leader and who's going to be a president, or who's going to be a this or that of different organizations, because they're not used to seeing it. Most Detroiters, when they go to other spaces, are also surprised for the same reason, because they're used to seeing, people of color in these different leadership roles. But if you go to another city, that does not happen. And so it's a plus and minus on both sides of trying to understand, what things are effective and what things aren't. But I always come back to, if you are open to a culture that has some sort of feedback loop and you're constantly trying, that's how you're going to get there versus anything else. There's no one solution. There's no one software. There's no one expert. There's no one anything that's going to work for all organizations at all times. It is truly going to be a custom. It is truly going to be a custom space and place that you're going to have to constantly work at. But if you do it, you're going to be that much more competitive. And if you do it, you are going to attract, like you mentioned, Isha, like you are going to attract, you are going to be a competitive space or place to attract folks. And I'll tell you very honestly, when I was in corporate and I was at the beginning stages of where people were starting to like use these things to weed out, who they wanted to work for, I thought it was silly. I did. I was like, we all, you just suffer. Like you guys just need to suffer like the rest of us. Very honest, because that's what I was taught. I was taught, especially by women who were above me. They were I was taught, like, you don't say anything. They can say all these inappropriate things. I can write a book one day about the inappropriate things that have been said at boardroom tables that I've said at, where I'm like, if anybody else heard this, we could get sued, right? like I cannot tell you how many of these crazy conversations we've had. And when initially we started to hire some of the folks from the younger generations and they would be asking questions and things like that, I'd be like, what is going on? But it became more of the norm. And honestly, it changed the way that I thought about it. I was at the time fully focused on building things new that way. I wasn't thinking that there was any chance to change the way things worked in, existing. And now both sides are looking at it differently. And it's just, again, like a whole new world, a place I didn't know that we'd be in, 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah. And I appreciate you bringing up the fact that it's an iterative process because, it's just so different when, your team is like 2 people and you guys already have that mindset of inclusivity. And so you're in charge of bringing on team members, but then as you grow and you have an HR team, those people necessarily don't have the same mindset as you do. So just like making sure you're building a scalable culture of inclusivity is so important. And yeah, it really is a process that just continues to change and grow. So
yeah, changing and growing, I think, are 2 important things to realize when you're in a founding stage. Just as a founder and starting, like, wow, don't be married to the idea that you have. And I think for me, the incubator programs through Wayne State and like Michigan Women Forward really helped me out with that, because they essentially drill down and get you to think like, no, but what exactly is the root cause of the problem that you're trying to solve? Because I don't know about you guys, but I started out here like, oh yeah, this is what I'm going to do. We're going to get this done. Boom. But it's like, wait, logistically, how can you get this done? Do you need systems? Like, okay, well, funding, how much is that going to cost? So it got me really to drill down and figure out how I really can create impact. One thing that within that space of social entrepreneurship and balancing the profit and purpose, I'm curious, Monica, your thoughts based on your experience. What type of strategies or measurements did you feel has been successful to really measure social impact value?
That's a good one as well. I've had several in different portfolios and just different programs that I've been a part of. I've had several companies that were double bottom line companies, social and profit, and triple bottom line companies, environmental, social, and profit. I know now they're like everyone's using ESG and some of these other terminologies to do the same thing. But in those spaces and places, I think people have to be true to who and what they are. And I always tell people, number one, decide on what you are. And so if you are going to be a business, then you have to have a profit perspective in all of your decisions, whether that's how you raise, how you grow, how you hire, all those things. It has to be profit focused. If you are not going to, if that's not going to be a part of all of your decisions, then you need to be a nonprofit. You need to be in the philanthropic space. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that, but you have to decide what you're trying to do. And once you have that decision, everything else kind of lines up from there. So once you have that understanding and I think now Techstars is a B Corp. Several other groups that I work with are B Corps, where it is a profit focused business that's not a nonprofit, but that has that ability and that eye and that lens towards doing good while they're making money. But again, it's while they're making money. And so there's nothing wrong with being on one side or the other, but you need to know which side you're on, because that's where people falter, is that they don't understand. Like, I get so many people who pitch me such amazing ideas, but I'm like, that's great, but that doesn't scale. And if it doesn't scale, it's not investable. And so that doesn't mean that it's a bad idea. That means that I'm not the person that's going to be able to help you, at least not in this role. I have a lot of roles, but at least not in this role that we're talking about right now. Like, I'm not the one who's going to be able to help you, because your goal right now is like, you want to do XYZ, but you don't know how it's going to be paid for, or you want to do XYZ and you won't have sustainable staffing, or you want to do XYZ and all these different things, which are all perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with it. It doesn't make you any less than, but you just need to know who you are and what you are, and you stay true to that. And that's how the metrics line themselves up after that.
Oh, I love that. I got it. So if it doesn't scale, it's not investable. I think that's a really great nugget. And I was just Googling, I believe Black Girls Code does a really great job of that. And so I was just double checking there, but that is a really great example of that, of knowing who you are and sticking with it, which has been really huge. And I think for me, everything has been, as far as working with corporations, has really been just through a network and through Wayne State and trying out these different programs that have really helped me, because what I found is, yeah, you either have to be on one side of the road, and many people, yes, and even in social entrepreneurship, many folks, it's been around, I would say seriously, for about the last, for a very long time, but a name started being, attached to it, I want to say last 10, 12 years or so. And because to this day, I'll get people like, what is social entrepreneurship? What are you doing? And so that's why I've learned to focus on the business side of it and say, well, we have a nonprofit arm where we help folks out, because
you're clear.
Yeah, you'll be in a nonprofit box and it's like, okay, well, good luck trying to pitch that, because so.
And I think there are, number one, there are funds that focus on social entrepreneurship ventures. Number two, there are funds that, even though they're looking for businesses that have some eye towards improving the world. That's one of their check marks on whether you'll be a good investment for them. And then there are funds that are fully focused on, they don't know how to rank activities, because activities take time. They take manpower. Manpower has cost. All those kind of things. They don't know how to rank your efficiency as an organization if you have parts of your business, your main business, that don't feed into the profit. And so you need to, like, I think I tell people that all the time too, is like, don't do the shotgun approach of like any person with investor in their title is a good person to speak to. Find investors who know how to invest in what you do. like you have to, else you guys are just wasting each other's time. Because they're looking for folks who are looking to profit. So who would be willing to chop off all the arms that don't lead to profit. And if you're not on that same space, then you're with the wrong type of investor. You're with the wrong type of person. And the other thing I often tell people too, especially in the venture world, is venture capital is not for everyone. It is not the only way to raise a business. Even if it is a for-profit scale up, scaling intended business, some of those businesses never take on venture. Venture is a very, even though it's really sexy and everybody talks about it and everybody it's in the mix and all that kind of stuff, it's all great. But I think literally less than 5% of total companies in the country take venture. And then of that 5%, that's where the sad, not the sad or the dirt is because of that 5%, you're having less than 1 or 2%. For those math folks in the room, that does not mean 1 or 2% of the 5%. That means you take the whole 100, the whole 100 of all those people, and less than 1 or 2% of those folks are folks that are underrepresented, that are getting part of those venture dollars. It is a very small subset, and that is a very true statement from the very first days when I started this. So again, venture is not the only way to scale your company, but the lessons still apply. Even if you're not taking venture as a way to scale your company, you still need to know who and what you are. You still need to know if you are a for-profit business, or if you have a bottom line that precedes the profit side. They can be even, but either it's included or it's not. And that's what you need to decide and understand. And once you do that, you can align all your business activities, all your metrics, all your hires, all your OKR, all your goals, all your setups. You can measure all of that by knowing your purpose and your objective. And then it makes it easier to know who to go into business with, who to partner with, who to do a collab with, all those things, because all those things line back up to the original goal of understanding what your mission is.
Oh, absolutely.
I want to take that point about mission and just go into talking about Equitec. So your work with that, I mean, first of all, how did you and this opportunity meet? And for you personally, why is building this new kind of startup ecosystem that isn't just another DEI obligation so important?
Well, it's exactly that word. It's because the obligation aspect. Working in the space that I've worked for many years, that's the first thing people think. Like, they think of diversity initiatives as something that you do for marketing or something that you do as an obligation. And so I want to find the people who understand and think about it as an opportunity. And that's what Equitec is. Equitec is looking, it's built from, it's a vision and idea built from the Upsurge Baltimore team. They want to use Baltimore as a model for the nation, to understand how to build tech infrastructures and tech-based cities that are based on this Equitec thought of, like, these folks want to build businesses with diversity and equity at their center, because they believe that diversity and equity are going to grow the ability for these companies to grow. exactly what we've been talking about. They're going to be able to hire better. They're going to, they're going to have access to different types of capital. They're going to have better ideas. They're going to have better outcomes. The teams are going to be, it's going to change the way that their businesses grow. And that's why it was such an exciting opportunity to me, because there's the Equitec vision. And then there's the thought of like, how does that go off into verticals, and how does that change the DNA of how companies are built? And I've been, like I've mentioned, most people know I've had a partnership in one way, shape, or form or another in the Techstars space for well over a decade. And in that space, one of the reasons why I've had a lot of partnerships over the years, some of them that didn't continue. Some of them didn't continue just because of, various business reasons, but sometimes it was because when they came into town, they were super excited to just give the check and be like, yes, we helped Detroit. And now we'll never see you again because we gave you the check and now we're gone. And so there were some folks that were like that. And those folks it was difficult to kind of, again, rebuild from scratch. Now that you're gone and you gave the check, now I have to rebuild this whole thing from scratch again for the next year. That is not efficient. That's not how we're going to grow and scale. That's burning us out. That's burning my teams out. That's burning everybody out. But Techstars, working with them for years, I've always worked with them. They're not perfect either. And everyone will tell you, I think anyone who says their organization is perfect is not really in a right mindset. They're not perfect either, but they're one of their core mantras of the fund and the accelerator group as a whole is give first. How do we give of ourselves first? What founders need, what a city needs, what an ecosystem needs first before we think of like the other pieces. And that's been part of it's a mission-based setup. And that's been part of the setup since I first partnered with them, way back in 2011, I think it was. And so that's why it was a combination of things. Obviously, we've had a Techstars in Detroit and would love to have one in the future. And I've helped Techstars get launched in multiple other cities and do different community and ecosystem and accelerator efforts and all these other spaces and places, which I loved and which was great. However, this was a unique opportunity. This is the first time they've had a full-fledged accelerator that had equity as part of the DNA. As part of the core thesis. They've had a social entrepreneurship space, which does get to some of that, but this is one of the first times where that was the thesis. And so the opportunity of that was just an honor to get a chance to lead something like this for the first time for a group that I've worked with and admired for many, many years.
Man, I keep catching myself because I'm enjoying this so much and wanting to be a listener that I'm like, I wanted to talk to you about alignment and purpose. So you shift a lot between different roles, right? And I think what you do is a testament to our culture that we live in right now. Puts pressure on us to constantly be this or that versus this and that, right? Mm-hmm. So I think you do a great job of that. And I was curious to know, but how do you make sure you're in alignment with your purpose and not veer from that?
That's a really good question. I would say I don't have like a real great verbal statement. I'm a gut person. I kind of follow my heart. And I go where my heart says, this is a great opportunity. Help this person do this thing. It's exciting. Your eyes are open. You're in the midst. And I haven't been wrong yet. So that's probably not what everyone should do, but that's what works for me. And so it works. I follow things that I'm excited by. I align with people. That's honestly why I end up, and I'll be very honest, overcommitted in a lot of ways and spaces because
that's real though. I hear you.
I end up overcommitted because I'm responding to what my gut tells me. And my gut tells me this person is a good person and what they're doing is a good cause. So do I have my family and my team and my assistants and stuff, they get on me all the time. I'll just look at my calendar. I'll be like, sure. Right. No clue how I'm going to get from that part of the city to the other part of the city. Doesn't really matter. This is awesome. Let's do it. And 90% of the time it works. I will say my sister is a long-term business partner of mine. She's founded Digital Girls with me and several other businesses. But she's also someone that I have really good rapport with back and forth. And she will always tell me that time doesn't work the way you think time works. And this is a very true statement, but for some reason, time works the way I want it to work when I'm working on things that align with where I think I'm supposed to be. It works every time. For some reason, I can get from New York to Detroit and be back on two events in one day, even though it shouldn't work. It works. So I kind of go with my gut. Yeah. My gut tells me if something is right. When I look back at my calendar, there's things that I've been doing for years that I quote unquote hang on to because I feel that they're still in the right space for me to be involved. After a while, if it's something that I don't think that I'm not helping. If I'm not helping anymore, then those are spaces and places that I need to detach from. Or what I'm learning now at this stage, just being very honest, is that I've worked with so many people over so many years and had so many teams. I'm being very intentional about building people to take over for me in spaces and places that I started, or spaces or places that I launched, things that I launched and things like that. So that, although I still think it's a good cause, I can't give enough time to it. I'm hurting it more than helping it because I can't give real time to it. But here's this person that I know is passionate about this same space and who could be a good resource. I'm becoming much more intentional about doing that rather than still trying to support, all the different initiatives and spaces and places that I think align with my purpose.
Oh, that's so good about being intentional. I think that's huge now. And I think over this
huge
year, especially with COVID, I think now more than ever, it has really helped everybody understand how to be more intentional and how to and take off things off of your plate that they just don't need to be there anymore.
They're just there.
They're just there. And it doesn't serve any type of happiness. And I think you have to be happy and no matter what. So
you do.
Yeah. And I guess as we wrap up, so in our last, what we used to do over on Clubhouse was our sessions were called Failing Forward. And so we wanted to know what is and I'm sure you have many of these stories. I feel like I already have many of these stories early on in my journey, but what would you say is your failing forward story or an example of one on your journey?
There's a lot of those.
Yeah.
None of them are pretty, but I think the goal is so many times where it's usually me thinking that time works different than time works. And being in the midst of things that I know are good initiatives, where me having to back out, me having to shift or change was amazing. Was amazing. And was not what I planned. But to me, and especially in some of the bigger things, I've been slated to be on stage in a couple of places where I got sick. I got really, really sick. One time because I had too many flights in a 24-hour period, and my body was like, nope, not going to happen. And my body was like, and I'm like, oh my God, these people have already paid me. like, what am I going to do? I had 4 flights. One was a red eye, and then I touched down in one city. Jumped on another flight, was just like an hour away, touched on another city, and then I was going to the third one, and it was just like. It was like, no. And, but it worked out amazingly. Cause I didn't know what to do. And I told them, how would you like me to handle this? And, it's like, cause I was basically like, I can't go forward, but here, all these people are waiting. I've already been paid. I've got all this thing, considered. They actually changed it to a different day, completely different format, made it a smaller, group. Which everyone was super excited for. They invited a select amount of people to have a smaller group on the same topic. And then they opened the space for somebody else who is a really good friend of mine. And then they were able to do this really huge launch of their company. And it just really worked out in so many amazing ways. But at the time I was like sobbing. I'm like, oh God, I've just ruined, I've ruined my reputation. I've ruined this person's event. But it was for me, it's usually events like that. I'm moving so fast and usually everything works out, but every once in a while, everything doesn't work out. And in those moments, I have to figure out how it's going to work. The idea wasn't mine that fixed it, but the actual fix turned out way better than anything I probably could have came up with on both ends. But that's happened multiple times in life, where I've had to bow out, or an opportunity seemed so great, but I had to say no. Not usually for time. Sometimes it's because of resources, or sometimes it's just because it doesn't align or whatever, but more often than not, those moments end up being huge. Number one, because it's authentic. Because I'm having an authentic connection with someone who is the lead, or I'm telling them I am not this plastic person. Like, you know, I actually breathe and all those other things. Like I have all these things going on that I need to be cognizant of, but that makes real relationships because they know that when I'm in the midst, I'm not lying, or I'm not like, you know, putting on some facade. I'm like being as real with you as I can. And those are my better relationships, are the ones where we've been public and we've been intentional with each other and authentic with each other and said like, this isn't working. And so now, because we both know that this isn't working, we've acknowledged it. Here's this amazing solution that we can come from it. But yeah, it's just, for me, it's because I think time works different than time works, as my sister says. And usually those instances either turn out really fabulously or really badly. Thank you guys.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Monica. And I think we know that anyone watching this will have a lot to take away from the lessons that were highlighted in the entire episode. So Dominique and I can't wait for episode 2. Anyone watching this, subscribe and go to the description for all of our links and resources and, you know, how to get in touch with Monica. And we will see you next time.